r/AskReddit by Reddify. What's the creepiest true story that happened to you or someone you know? Serious. This happened about 3 years ago or so. I was sitting in the kitchen, and it was around 10 PM or so. I heard a really loud thump in the basement. I live alone with 2 dogs, so any sound is somewhat frightening to me. So, as I'm walking down the stairs to the basement, I hear the thumping again, in an oddly rhythmic pattern. I creak open the door into the basement bedroom, and I see my dog is just ramming his head and body into the wall, over and over. I can't explain to you how shockingly unnatural looking it was. It looked like he was controlled or something. I called him over, and he stopped and came upstairs with me. 3 hours later, I hear the thumping again. I get out of bed again. However, when I went down to check it, it was my other dog that was ramming his head into the wall. It was like he was possessed. Scared the cheese out of me. Since then, nothing like that has happened. But what an unexplainable event. Rodents in the wall. Sounds freaky regardless. That is what my coworker suggested. But I do remember being able to hear the rodents in the walls of my childhood home. But I've never heard anything in my current place. However, it definitely sounds the most logical. Context: my mom's college boyfriend became her stalker after she left his awful, abusive husband back in the mid-80s. Several years ago, just before the last Harry Potter movie came out, my mom and I were marathoning the other 7 movies, and at about 1 AM the phone rings. Normally we don't answer. We figure if it's important they'll leave a message. But a call that late at night is probably urgent. Mom answers and almost immediately her face changes, and she tells me, "LVHQ. Go wake up your father." Hit. I've never seen my mom this scared. I run upstairs and get him. Back downstairs she's still on the phone and I have no idea what's going on. Dad has some words with the caller, and we hug it out in the kitchen. This is when I found out my mom had a stalker, despite him being silent for years. And their whole breakup happening halfway across the country. He somehow found us. Said he'd driven by our house. Complimented the neighborhood. Freaks me out to this day. Wondering how much he knows about us. And if I've ever talked to him unwittingly. Edit. Formatting. Stalking is one of the things that creeps me out the most. I've seen a few shows about stalkers and it never fails to freak me the hell out. I can't even imagine living with one. I hope everything's okay. When I was in my very early 20s my mom and I shared a house. We had a stalker. The first night we stayed in the house someone got into our car. My mom happened to come outside. Saw him. Set off the panic alarm on the car and scared him away. My backpack had been in the car and he dumped the contents into the floorboard of the car, but left the paycheck that I had just cashed. All the cash still in a bank envelope. The police said it seemed that they were searching for something specific and really questioned me about what that might be. But I have no idea. Police were able to get a partial palm print off the car, but had no matches in their system. My mom and I were out doing yard work and found a phone cord under our deck. It connected into the phone box on the outside of the house. We called the phone company out, and they said that they figured that someone had been using the cord to hook up a phone and lay under our deck and listen in on our phone calls. They removed the cord and put a lock on the phone box. We also frequently heard someone walking outside our windows at night. We would call the police and they would drive by but not see anyone. Another time all of the light bulbs from our exterior lights were removed. Once we came home and my mom realized that a pair of earrings and a stuffed animal that had been sitting on her dresser were missing. There was no sign of anyone having broken in, but those items never turned up, and we were sure someone had been in the house. We frequently heard this weird thump and squeak noise that we could never figure out what caused it. Another time my mom was raking leaves at the front of the house and saw something in one of our bushes. It was a voice-activated recorder, wrapped in black plastic and tied to the trunk of one of our bushes. The recorder was tapped into our phone line. Someone had gotten under our house, drilled a hole through our foundation, and run a phone cord through the hole into the recorder in the bush. We have no idea how a neighbor, though they were all elderly, didn't see or hear this happening. The police who were well aware of the issues by this point, now seemed to realize that this was a serious, scary problem. They sent several officers out to investigate the recorder. We were in the house talking to an officer and heard the thump/squeak noise that we always heard. We told the officer that's the noise we can't identify. As it turns out, at that moment an officer was crawling under the house and had bumped a pipe. He was able to repeat the noise. The police figured that it was almost impossible to get into or out of the crawl space under our house without bumping that pipe. And we heard that noise a lot. The police think that whoever it was getting into the crawl space and lying under the house listening to us. We put a cover over the entrance and glued it down. We put sequins in a certain order in the glue so that we could tell if it had been removed and re-glued. It was all insanely creepy. We eventually moved. I moved in with my boyfriend, now husband, on a second floor apartment. I felt so much safer with people all around and figured that the stalking issue was behind me. Not long after we moved and I noticed that our caller ID wasn't working. I called the phone company and they informed me that a Mr. Kramer had called and requested that the caller ID service be turned off on our phone. I had a meltdown. I was so upset. First off because the phone company let some random person make changes on our phone line, and secondly because apparently the issues were not behind me and they were planning something and didn't want the caller ID to show up. I put a password on our account so no changes could be made without it. And that was the last issue we ever had. I really think the caller ID issue was possibly unrelated. Maybe someone was accidentally making changes to the wrong account or something. Either way it was very creepy, though I have to admit. If the person had wanted to do something bad to either one of us, there were surely plenty of times that could have been done. It really seems they just wanted to observe us and scare us. I've posted this before. Staying in a motel with my wife one night. She falls asleep really quickly, but for me, it takes a while to drift off to sleep. So I'm lying there in the dark for a while and I distinctly hear a voice coming from somewhere in the room quietly, though just above a whisper. Say, "I think they're asleep now." Immediate fright response. I bolt out of bed, turn on all the lights, and start frantically searching the room. I look in the bathroom behind the shower curtain. Under the bed, nothing. It's a one-room motel room. The door is bolted shut. There's nobody else in the room. My wife is now freaked because of my actions. What I experienced is called a hypnagogic hallucination, and not an uncommon experience during the initial stages of sleep. But if I had not known what that was, I would have thought the room was haunted. Didn't you read about that guy who built a room in the ceiling of the hotel that he owned and watched everyone through specially angled ceiling vents? That it could have actually been real, dude. There was actually more investigation. And it turns out the whole thing was made up. There were a lot of inconsistencies in his story, and when someone pressed him, he admitted it was all just a fantasy. The journalist who wrote the piece published an apology and everything. I was stalked by a 40-plus-year-old man from the ages of 10 till 14. My parents told me about it when I was 13. I was unaware, but they were. He had been following me to school. He had been mailing me things, taking pictures of me, and sending my parents threatening messages in all sorts of ways. Well, what did you and your parents do? We had a panic button for in case of him invading the home. Our house was under police watch. The school had to hire a taxi company to drive me home. This isn't paranormal. Just creepy dude being creepy/almost happy. I had this friend who was a nice guy trademark and would often complain that women led him on and wouldn't date him, blah blah, friend zone blah. I'm not entirely sure why we were best friends, but I did like him and his weird intellectual hippie aesthetic, and chose to overlook the creepiness because I was a teenager and didn't get how creepy it actually was. We would occasionally fight because he wanted to have sex with me, but I would turn him down. We would cool off for a week or so, then hang out like nothing happened until he tried again and then took the rejection like a giant baby. At the time I had a bit of a drug problem, but decided to get clean over our university's winter break. It was more intensive than that, but for the sake of brevity I decided I get clean then did. When we return to school he has brought a bunch of drugs back with him and is trying to convince me I just had a drinking problem, not a drug problem. I was like, nah, pretty sure drugs were a problem too, but he was guilt tripping me saying we had planned to do these drugs together. True, and that one time wouldn't hurt. Not true. I'm holding these drugs and have this intense come to Jesus moment at 15 days clean that I need to get out of this situation or else I'm getting high. I hand the baggie back and tell him I'm all set. He gets ducking enraged and is freaking out. I even pay him for the drugs that I didn't do because I think it's a financial issue. But then he lets it slip that he was hoping I would be open to having sex with him after I took the drugs, but now he wouldn't get that chance. To this day I do not get how he doesn't understand that giving someone who does not want to have sex with you drugs so they will have sex with you is ape. TL. Doctor being 15 days clean saved me from being aped by, now, ex-best friend who was strangely forward about wanting to ape me. Edit. He was later accused of raping someone. 2 people actually. 2 separate cases, and I have absolutely zero doubt that he actually did ape them. His ideas around consent were concerning to say the least. Used to have a toxic mindset like this. I do nice things. I should get something back. Finally realized one day that, holy hit, I should do nice things because they are nice. And no one should feel obligated to do anything like that. Thankfully, this was before I had the social aptitude to get a girlfriend. So there was no harm done, because I had zero contact with females my age. I'm glad you hung up your fedora and became a real man. Mom walking through house with a realtor. 3-year-old me in tow. Realtor mentions that the house used to be an orphanage. Mom loves old houses. This one had plenty of rooms and old house winess. About 15 minutes in, 3-year-old me kept asking, where'd that little boy go? Too spooky for mom. Edit. Removed an extra word. When my sis and I were little, my parents were in the market for a house. They found one they loved. So they brought us to see it. Both of us started crying and screaming when they opened the door to the very normal, fully finished basement. Close the door. Take us into the backyard to calm us down. Then take us on a tour again. Same problem. Sis and I are terrified of the nice basement. My parents opted not to buy the house with the portal to hell only children can see. I'm one of those horror movie white people who like to check hit like this out. I would have been down there for hours. Just trying to figure out what's going on. My friend came home from school one day to find that her house had been broken into. She decided to go inside and look around whilst she called her mum. She was done looking at the second floor when she made for the stairs. Her mum convinced her to go outside and wait for the police, who she had called. Later on, the police asked the family if they owned a crowbar. They said they didn't. They then said it looks like the offender was still in the house when she got home, and they were waiting at the top of the stairs with a crowbar, which they stupidly left behind when they fled. Edit. There were items that were disturbed upstairs, but only in the one place. Through the first door you see at the top of the stairs. That was the only room that was moved around, suggesting that that's where they were when she came home. That gave me chills. I'm glad she called her mom, or it sounds like it would have ended much differently. Do you know if they caught anyone? Unfortunately, no one was ever brought in. So, about 3 years ago during summer I had a habit of staying up late playing games with my window open. This usually wasn't a problem as my neighborhood was usually quiet. However, one night someone knocked on my window around midnight. When I went over to investigate I heard someone calling out for help in Spanish. My family was up, and I assumed it was one of my neighbors. So I went outside. Once I saw the person I immediately knew something was off course. 1. This wasn't one of my neighbors, and 2. This person's clothing was ripped, and they didn't have shoes on. Turns out the person was a she. I thought it was a young boy at first, and she only spoke Spanish. I tried communicating with my basic Spanish skills to no avail. Eventually I went inside to ask my parents for help. We ended up calling my uncle, who was fluent in Spanish. He helped translate and told us that she said she was being human trafficked from Honduras and needed help. She wanted either $500 or a car to LA. We couldn't give either and offered to call the police, but she seemed adamant that the police didn't get involved. After this bombshell, my family went inside and decided to just call the police. After making this decision, we wanted to check up on her at least. But as my mom and I were walking outside, we saw a car with no headlights pull onto our street. We immediately noped back inside. Once we felt that the coast was clear, we went back out and the lady was gone. We called the cops and filed a report, but we never heard anything more. Sounds like a damsel in distress type scam. Asking for money and insisting the police don't get involved. Yay, after the initial shock of the situation passed, we thought of this possibility also. Make sure to like and subscribe so we can watch together.